الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل
اللهم
على
صل على محمد وعلى
محمد بن محمد आजा असग़र की जगह मेरी सकीना सो जा आजा असग़र की जगह मेरी सकीना सो जा जागती माँ ने कहा मेरी सकीना सो जा आजा असग़र की जगह मेरी सकीना सो जा जो तुझे खौफ है शायद मैं उसे कम कर दूं आज आँखों पे तेरे ना दे अली दम कर दूं दूर क्यों बैठी हैं मेरी सकीना सो जा है आजा असग़र की जगह मेरी सकीना सो जा बाप के सीने पे आदत है तुझे सोने की मेरी गोदी तेरे काबिल तो नहीं है फिर भी है मेरे दिल की सदा मेरी सकीना सो जा आजा असग़र की जगह मेरी सकीना सो जा मुझसे देखा नहीं जाता ये तेरा दर्द जिगर ये बताते हुए अच्छा तो नहीं लगता मगर अब न आएंगे चचा मेरी सकीना सो जा है आजा असग़र की जगह मेरी सकीना सो जा कैद खाने में जो आ जाएंगे तेरे बाबा खुद उठा दूंगी तुझे शाने हिला कर तेरा अच्छा कुछ देर जरा मेरी सकीना सो जा आजा असग़र की जगह मेरी सकीना सो जा जागती माँ ने कहा मेरी सकीना सो जा आजा असग़र की जगह मेरी सकीना सो जा मेरी मेरी सकीना सो जा, मेरी सकीना सो जा। अला लअनतुल्लाह अलल क़ौमिज़ ज़ालिमीन वसयअलमु الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. إلهي بحق محمد وأنت المحمود، وبحق علي وأنت الأعلى، وبحق فاطمة وأنت فاطر السماوات والأرض، وبحق الحسن وأنت قديم الإحسان، وبحق الحسين وأنت قديم الإحسان. اللهم ارحم السيد حسن نقوي رحمة واسعة وتغمده برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة. الرحمن الرحيم.
Ahsan, Abbas, Jazakallah. Thank you so much for giving us your precious time. Really appreciate. Thank you so much. I request Maulana Syed Ali Abbas Razavi to start Majlis, please. Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad Salawat.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Sayyidina wa Maulana bil Qasimi Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Wa ala ali baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin al-ma'sumin al-madhlumin. الذين قضى الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أما بعد. Today we're mourning, as we have been doing for the last couple of days, and as we'll continue to be doing until these 40 days are complete. It's saddening for me, in a way, to be here, because my dream was to meet Marhum again, of which every time that we've met, it's either been in Karbala, Najaf, or then doing the work of Allah in Dar es-Salaam. And hearing the fact that he passed away was a huge shock to me. There are very few people I find who inspire you, who push you to do better, who celebrate in your success, and who mourn with you in your sadness. Said Hassan was one of those people who I can truly say was a father figure to myself in the last half a decade or so that I've come to know him on a personal level. And so it's difficult for me to also be here, but I'm grateful to Allah that I'm here to contribute in these 20-25 minutes or so. Just looking at a hadith, and that hadith really resonated with me, especially in relation to the personality that we're here to commemorate. A person comes to Rasulullah and he asks him a question. He says to him that who are those people of faith, of belief, those people who have completed their religion? So the Prophet decides to list him 4 qualities. He says, if you see these 4 qualities in a person, then know that their faith is complete. And truly I must say that And you'll see for yourself that all of these four qualities were found in Sayyid Hassan. So Allah says, look, the first quality is this. If you want to see a person, if you want to know a person, if they're complete in faith, then look and see. Do they argue or don't they argue? So the first quality is this, that you won't find them people who argue, the people of silence, people who don't, if they're insulted, fight back in the sense that they don't make a fuss. They remain quiet. And as we know, the way of salvation is within silence. The stages of self-realization only come to a person when they can truly appreciate silence. But here Rasulullah is not talking about silence, at least on one level, in terms of its mystical dimension. But what he says is that a person who has control over themselves, that even if you find in the way of Allah, they're insulted, they remain quiet. Especially when you're a public figure. You'll have people slandering you, you'll have people saying things against you, as is the norm of any public figure. And in that space of time, to remain quiet is one section or one part, a quarter of your faith, a quarter of a person who's complete. So then Rasulullah continues. And he says, well, look, that's not the only condition. There's a second condition as well. And that second condition is this person has hilm. Now look, hilm has different understandings, different interpretations. But there's three parts of hilm that you'll come to know. Firstly, there's a level of clemency, which is the level of forgiveness, a level of tolerance and forbearance. But with that hilm, you find that there's wisdom behind it. And you find that some of the greats have had this hilm, had this clemency, had this wisdom, tolerance, forbearance. And this is why they say Imam Hassan himself was such, especially in front of Muawiyah. When they signed the document that they did, there was a level of clemency within the Imam, or clemency to the best that human beings can reach. So Rasulullah says, look, the second dimension to a person is clemency, is hilm. Then he takes it to the third level. And he says, well, look, there's a third dimension to this as well. He says, know that a person who's completed his faith is a person who has sabr, has patience. Now, patience doesn't come automatically, you're not born with patience. You find that through your own trial and tribulation, you develop patience. Patience is a sign of closeness to Allah. Patience is a sign of a person who's submitted, at least internally, to the will of God. And so Rasulullah says, well, look, if you find these three qualities in a person, then they're nearly there to complete faith. But the fourth quality is this. He says that in that person who has complete faith, that person you can recognize as perfect in their deen, is the best in akhlaq as well. Akhlaq is not just falsely smiling at someone or putting your hand out to someone. Yeah, superficially that may be. Akhlaq is a state of being. Akhlaq is the ability to feel other people's pain. Akhlaq is to be able to go into a village and sit with the most destitute of all people. Akhlaq is the ability at night time to go and to give food to someone. Akhlaq is the ability, for example, to give water to somebody. Akhlaq is the ability to help orphans. That is what akhlaq is. Akhlaq is feeling the pain of an individual. When you see all of these four characteristics laid in front of you, that is what I saw in this Marhum. Sayyid Hassan had all of these four qualities. And this is why my belief is that he was a person who perfected himself and then he went towards his creator. And perhaps all of you were praying for him as well. We were all praying that he recovered. Did Allah accept your dua? Allah accepted your dua. The difference is this though, in a situation like this where there's life and death, All of us can pray. But the final thing comes down to the free will of the person. It's not bade that there was a moment where Amir al-Mu'mineen came to him. And he said to him, look, there's two pathways here. You can either go back because people are praying for you and their dua, if all those people are praying, becomes mustajab. Or you have a choice. You've got Ahlul Bayt in front of you. You've got Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam in front of you. You've got Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein. It's now your choice which direction you want to go. Remember, prayer doesn't remove free will of a person. It's a theological discussion, which is not the time for. But your prayers were answered. The choice was given, and he decided to go with Ahlul Bayt, knowing full well that behind me, everyone has the ability to take care of themselves. When faced with that question, he went towards that direction. Allah gives people choices. And this is why today he's in a better place. When the option was there, the direction of Ahlul Bayt was taken. Now look, we can only imitate people like this. But we've also got to understand the ability for a person to get to that stage. There are a number of things that we can do for him, and there are certain things he can do for us. So very quickly, within 20 minutes, 15 minutes that we have, the best thing that we can do, because remember, as a father, if not in this world and the hereafter, the parents have the ability to still discern their children, even within the grave. Regardless, and there's hadith on this, on the Day of Judgment, people will come and they'll say, well, look, I served my parents all their life. I said, no, but after they passed away, they disowned you because of a lack of service to them. The best thing we can do is what you're doing today. What we're doing today is Majlis of Syed al-Shuhada. And on 7 maqamat in the hereafter, this benefits a person. Best thing that we can do. That's exactly what we're here to do. Remember Imam Hussein. And always remember this story. A number of years ago, it took place. In India, there's a city in the UP province known as Jaunpur. In Jaunpur, there's an old lady, still present today, old lady. And she lost her husband and she had one son. And her entire life rotated around Azab Imam Hussein. So when the first 10 days of Marhum used to come, she used to take water and food to the Azadar of the Imam, just to feed them, just to give them food, just to give them water. A year happened where her husband passed away, then after that her son passed away. And every morning at Fajr time she would come and she would light a candle on his grave. Every morning, come forward, and until that day came where the moon of Muharram comes forward. And at that moment, she comes to the grave of her son and she says, look, from today onwards, for the next 10 days, I'm not going to come to your grave. The reason being is this, not because I don't love you, it's because of the fact that it's Imam Hussein's 10 days. And from the 1st of Muharram onwards, she would go, very same thing, give water, give food to all of the Azadar of Imam Hussein. Anyhow, a long story short, Ashura comes, Ashura departs. On the 11th of Muharram, when she comes early in the morning at Fajr time, she was running to her son, had a small candle in her hand. She was about to light it when she gets to the grave. As she gets there, she sees from a distance that there's light on the grave of her son. And when she goes forward, she finds that there are candles which were lit. And so she looks more carefully, just after Fajr time, and she looks carefully. And she sees there's a woman dressed in black who's sitting there. And so her first reaction was this, that this isn't your son's grave. This is my son's grave. And the woman who was sitting there didn't say anything. And again, she says, look, I think you're mistaken. This is not your son's grave. This is my son's grave. Eventually, that woman replies. She said, for 10 days, you remembered my son. I made sure that your son wasn't forgotten in these 10 days. And that's the best form of giving anybody anything, is to remember Sayyid al-Shuhada, to remember Ahlul Bayt. When they give, they give. our responsibility as servants to them. To be happy when they're happy, to be sad when they're sad. So first thing really is this azab Imam Hussein. This is why Ayatollah Marashi, Najafi Marashi says to his son, look, every Thursday, make sure there's a small majlis, some musibah, masaib on my grave. Even to this day, you'll find. If you go to his library, you'll see people still sit there to this day on a Thursday night, still recite Masaib of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And it's been, what, roughly 31 years since he passed away, 32 years since he passed away. Second thing is this, and I'm sure we're all doing this, but second thing is plant a tree. As long as somebody's taking shade, doesn't matter who they are, regardless of who they are, as long as they're benefiting from under that tree, you'll find from that tree, you'll find that reward is coming. Second thing after, or third thing after this is make a well, dig a well. This day and age, you'll find that parts of the world, people are thirsty. And whole villages have converted. For example, in Sindh, whole villages have converted just because of water. Dig a well, as the tradition says. Fourthly, help an orphan. Help an orphan for as long as you're helping them. And then whatever knowledge they gain and how they develop. And as you know, it's not very expensive. This is for all of us, not just one person, for everyone. If all the Shia who are able helped orphans, none of our orphans today would be suffering. None of our orphans today. You'd find there wouldn't be any orphans in the destitute situation. But anyhow, this is a lesson for us. Time is there to help them. Finally, what one can do is this. Refine one's own character so that is beneficial for our parents, our loved ones, and thereafter. The final story I'll give is this. There was a very big scholar of ours, a grand scholar, Ayatollah Syed Jamaluddin Gulpaygani. Jamaluddin Gulpaygani was a student of Syed Ahmed Karbelai. For those people who know, Syed Ahmed Karbelai was also the teacher of Qadi Marhum, Syed Ali Qadi. Although there's a huge difference between Syed Qadi and Ayatollah Gulpaygani, but both of them studied under Syed Ahmed Karbelai. Syed Gulpaygani says, look, I was in Isfahan. He was studying in Isfahan at the time. In Isfahan, there was a teacher of philosophy and Irfan by the name of Jahangir Khan. He was very famous. He's a very famous mystic of his time. He was also the teacher of Naqvi Isfahani. Some of you may know him. He's a great scholar of Mashhad. He was a great scholar, great mujtahid, but he was also a great spiritual leader. To give you an example, the Sharif of Mecca at the time, this King Abdullah's great-grandfather, was a murid of Naqvi Isfahani. The letters are available, you can see it. When the British, for example, attacked, or when the Ottomans had an issue coming into the Hijaz, Sharif of Mecca would write a letter to Naqvi. Naqvi would tell him what to do, but anyhow. So Naqvi is also a student of Jahangir Khan. And as you know, the mystics of Isfahan are very famous. Taht Fulat is there. And there's an entire school of philosophy and mysticism which is in Isfahan, which nobody really touches today. You find the entire school of Mashhad, of Irfan, is the entire foundations comes from Isfahan. And even the likes of, though many people won't know, but Ayatollah Sistani, his teacher was Mujtaba Qazwini, whose teacher was Said Musa Zarabadi within the mystical sciences. But anyhow, it's all linked to the school of Isfahan. So they say that Ayatollah Gulpaygani, when he was younger, before he went to Najaf, he would go to Taht Fulat, and which is a graveyard, by the way, graveyard of many awliya Allah were buried there. He would go there and he would do spiritual exercises. He says, one night when I went to Taht Fulat, he goes that there was a hujra, there was a room there, and I went into the room and I said to the person, can I do my spiritual practice, pray, whatever it was. So he says, fine, you can do it here. It was an old man sitting there, and he says that as I was praying, somebody brought in a tabut. Tabut came as a body inside it. So he says, I was praying, but I looked up and I saw that they'd given the old man who was reciting Quran some money, and they said, look, all night, if you can read Quran for this mayyat, that'll be great. So this is fine, so he started reading Quran. So I told Ayatollah Pegani, he says, I was doing my spiritual exercises, and at that moment I see two men who were looking very disturbed, and their faces were very disturbing. They were disturbed, and they were looking disturbed. And they came along, and they were very scary looking. And he says that in the process of me reciting, doing my dhikr, he says that they literally opened up the tabut and they started hitting the dead body, the mayyat. And he goes, at that point in the middle of my prayer, I was trying to indicate to the person reading the Quran, get up and look and see what's happening. And this person continued to read Quran. He says, as time went on, he says, I could see them hitting, I could see them bringing all sorts of implements. I could see them into the extent that they were burning this individual. And he says, I felt that, I felt palpitations. I was worried. He says, at that point, another man came in, and I was trying to point to him to try and stop these individuals, but it didn't happen. So he says at that point, he says, look, I said, I can't stay here any longer. If I stay here and if I sit here any longer, I myself am going to pass away looking at all of these things take place. He says, I broke my dhikr there and I went outside. It was snowing at the time. So he says, I went outside, I went a couple of steps and I collapsed. And then after that, he says that for a number of days, I had temperature. 2 or 3 days later, Jahangir Khan came and he smiled at me and he says, son, if you can't take this, how are you going to take the grave? He says, what you saw was a vision. Nobody else saw it. He says, this was adab for a person who's a tyrant. Why was he a tyrant? What is the definition within akhlaq of tyranny? Definition is this, to give you a practical example. If there's a fight that takes place in your mosque between two people or two children or whatever it may be, for a person to blindly support an individual without the full knowledge from both sides is what you call tyranny. But anyhow, why do I say this? The best thing we can do for our parents, for those people who have gone, is to rectify our own selves. Because when we do that, the benefit goes to our parents and our grandparents and so forth. So look, I was given 20 minutes or so and my discussion has come to an end. But I just want to say 2 more things of my side, because the most important part of any majlis is to shed 2 tears for Imam Hussein. When Imam Sadiq alayhi salam was asked, why do you cry for? He gave one answer. He said, the reason why we cry is to gladden the heart of our mother Fatima. It's why we're all gathered here as well. These tears are powerful, should never be underestimated. We're here to remember a father. Just want to give one story of a father as well. That father was 33 years old when his wife was brutally murdered. It's one hadith that I heard from a marja. I haven't read it, I heard from the marja though. He says when Amir al-Mu'mineen for the final time was burying Zahra and leaving her for the final time, he was in the grave. And he was in the grave, he was reciting Quran. He says after he finished reciting Quran, Amir al-Mu'mineen wanted to stand up and get out. Now remember, there were only a few people standing outside of the grave. Salman was one of them. And 2 small children were there, 7, 6 years old. Now remember, these 2 children have become yatim. And here's a father, now becoming a mother and a father to these 2 children. It says when Imam tried to get up, tradition says his legs began to shake, his knees gave way and he fell. When he fell, you found Salman was standing there. And the only thing Salman was saying was, Mawla, Amir al-Mu'mineen, we didn't see you fall in Badr or Uhud. And what makes you fall like this? And they say Imam was looking up and he puts his eyes down, puts his head down. He saw two young children watching him. He couldn't take it, so he put his head down, feeling pain. Second time, again, he tried to stand up. Second time, again, his knees began to shake, and again, he fell back down again. Again, you could see that he was embarrassed. Two children were watching him. After this, the Imam wouldn't have any peace anymore. Here he is burying Zahra. Mawla's in pain. This is the third time he tried to stand up. So Ayatollah says, he says that he holds the back of the wall of the grave. He tries to stand up. And as he begins to stand up, again, his knees begin to shake. But this time, as his knees begin to shake, he remembers something and he calls someone. At that moment, he calls upon Zainab. He says, Zainab, come and help me because your father's feeling weak. So Ayatollah says, he says, two small hands come forward and says, Father, if my mother Zahra is in here, I'm here for you. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. If we could recite a Surah Fatiha for Syed Hassan Naqvi. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Ahsan, Maulana, Jazakallah. On behalf of Naqvi family, I sincerely thank you for joining us, for giving us your time, for being a part of this program, and for sharing our grief. Ahsan, Jazakallah. May Allah accept your zikr, inshallah, and may the sawab of this majlis reach Sayyid Hassan Naqvi, inshallah. Ahsan, thank you so much. I request, now we will have a short tribute by Brother Jafar, inshallah. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It is a great honor for me to be asked to share my short experience with Marhum's Syed Hassan Naqvi. Although I have known Syed Muhammad and Syed Ali Raza for a longer period of time and have had more interaction with them, the short interaction that I did have with Syed Hassan was profound as well. When I remember Syed Hassan, it takes me back to my childhood when I first had the pleasure of meeting his late father, Syed Ansar Hussein Naqvi, who used to frequent our house in Nairobi. And the incident that comes to my mind was a very happy moment when Marhum used to like mangoes, and he would try and avoid eating it when Syed's mother was around. And when Syed's mother and my mother went to Majlis, he would call myself or my brother Abbas and sit down and have those mangoes. And the reason I remember that when I remembered Marhum Syed Hassan was because when I look back at Syed Hassan, I remember the occasions that we shared together. It reminds me of the spirit and his nature of being very pleasant and very amiable with all age groups. I first had the pleasure of meeting Syed Hassan at the World Federation Conference many years ago when he came from Africa as a counselor for Africa Federation. And at that time, he was active in Tabligh work in Africa. And I had the opportunity to share, or we shared some of the experiences then. A few years later, I had the opportunity of meeting him again, and this time I just got married, I remember, and I mentioned to him that I was married, and he asked me who my father-in-law was. And coincidentally, my father-in-law, Marhum Anwar Panjwani, and Syed Hassan went back to the days of Dodoma, and they knew each other from back then. And a few years later, we finally met when I went for ziyarat with my family on a couple of occasions with the Naqvi family. And what I can say about the man is three things. One, his love for Ahl al-Bayt, his love for Quran and the recitation of Quran and the promotion of the recitation of Quran. And this was all made successful because he had the passion for the community. And this passion is what is missed today. We remember him fondly because of the way he interacted with all ages of people, be it the ulama, the Maulanas of our center, be it the Joe public, all of us together, or be it the young children. His personality was such that it resonated and remains in our memory. Last but not least, the most important was the smile. The smile that is, I'm sure, remembered by everyone. He had this smile that remains in everyone's memory. Finally, I would ask you all to remember him with the Surah Fatiha. Please let us recite Surah Fatiha for Syed Hassan Naqvi and all our marhumin. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Ahsan.
Ahsan, Brother Jafar, Jazakallah. I request Uncle Ramzan to start ziyarat, please.
السلام عليك يا مولاي يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا مولاتي يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا مولاي حسن المجتبى، السلام يا زين العابدين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا قائد الغر المحجلين، السلام عليك وعلى ضجيعيك آدم ونوح عليهم السلام. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، خصوصا سيدي مولاي أبو الفضل عباس بن أمير المؤمنين ومسلم بن عقيل وقاسم بن حسن وهاني بن عروة وحبيب بن مظاهر والحر الشهيد الرياحي وزينب الكبرى وأم كلثوم وسكينة بنت الحسين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا غريب الغرباء السلطان أبا الحسن علي بن موسى الرضا، كن شفيعنا وشفيع والدينا في يوم الجزاء. السلام عليك وعلى أختك فاطمة المعصومة. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا صاحب العصر والزمان، عجل الله تعالى فرجك وجعلنا من أنصارك وأعوانك وشيعتك والسائرين تحت لواءك. السلام عليك يا مولاي، وفقنا الله في الدنيا زيارتك وفي الآخرة شفاعتك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Uncle Ramzan, I request you to please recite Amma Yujib 5 times for all the Maris. Bismillah, please.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء، 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 أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
Jazakallah. Thank you so much. May Allah bless you. Once again, on behalf of Naqvi family, I would like to thank all the reciters and participants for sharing our grief and for joining us every night. I request all Mu'mineen to please recite Surah Fatiha for all Marhumeen as well as for Syed Hassan Naqvi. Ahsan, Jazakallah. Thank you so much. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.